Hello, and welcome back to the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum. My name is Brittany Sullivan with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. A couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. First, a quick reminder to stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. At any time during today's event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, which include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. To ask questions throughout the session, simply type into the Q&A chat, and we will address your questions at the end of the session. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Matt Poleski, Regional Chief Financial Officer at Arthur J. Gallagher. We're excited to have Matt with us for a keynote titled FP&A Strategies for Innovation. Welcome, Matt, and over to you.
Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here. And we'll see if we through here a bit. So let's see. I work with Arthur Gallagher on the North CFO. And what do we do when we're in finance is we measure things. And one of the things I like to talk about is when we measure things is what's our confidence intervals about them. Because what I notice is when the weather's sunny and things are nice outside, no one ever asks me a question. And then, so let's say our confidence interval is plus or minus 10. If I say it's 75, it doesn't matter if it's 85, it doesn't matter if it's 65. No questions asked. Then when it's snowing, when it's cold outside, they want to know it's 24.8 degrees outside, and then I got to remeasure it 3 times. They're hoping when you remeasure it, it's going to be 35, 40. It's going to be a different answer. So some of this is balancing innovation with profitability, and how do we make sure that we keep it sunny so we don't have to answer all those questions, and what can we do ahead of time to keep us out of those situations. So let's see here. Okay, so agenda here is winning in business. Really, and how do you win? It's capital allocation. It's knowing your business life cycle. Some of these Bush-Vail rules I find very interesting and helpful. And then what are the takeaways that we should have through this? So that main points right there. Okay, so we start with, like, the analogy I use all the time is business is a sport. And this is, our Shark Tank guy, Mark Cuban, comes in and says, like, look, it's an ultimate sport where you're in competition 24/7, 365. So when they're making decisions, should I invest in something? Should I not invest in them? It's not really all about the numbers, but it's about the confidence, the belief in what you're investing in, and really you're making a bet all the time. And so what we're really doing is just measuring whether those bets work or not. So it really matters what we're measuring. Okay. So in finance, we tend to be, are we the scorekeepers or the coaches? Which role do we have? Because we can just keep the score, but we're also advisors. And really, like, how do we balance being profitable versus innovating to keep up with strategy, to figure out where we want to spend money? How do we balance those two things is really a key over and over again. Where are we spending the money? So how do we win? This was a great book, and it's from a lot of private equity people, where it talks about, 8 CEOs that really just completely outperformed their peer groups, and really by the numbers were the best. And there were some themes that came out of this that were capital allocation is the CEO's most important job. What counts in the long run is the increase in value, not your overall small. It's not about being big. It's not about how fast you grow. It's about how much value you create for the stockholders. And cash flow, not your reported earnings or your P&L, is what determines that value and how you're spending that cash. And really, with all this theme on, okay, we're going to have COEs, centralized decision-making, it's really those decentralized organizations that release entrepreneurial energy and keep cost and rancor down. So how do we do that within the system? Okay. So, and it's all about capital allocation, and really, so running operations efficiently and effectively and deploying the cash generated by those. So you got 3 choices for capital allocations. It's how do we invest in our existing ops? Maybe we want to buy other businesses. And then how do we handle our capital structure, which is how much debt we have, how many dividends we're paying, we're going to issue stock, like how we manage those things actually really determine value. I really focus on the first two, which is I spend a lot of time on our existing operations, and then I spend a lot of time on our M&A activity, less time on our actual capital structure. But I feel like the business unit managers that I support are always asking us about what's my P&L, what's my income statement, and see here, like we run generally around a 35 margin. Well, if I run a 35 margin, why can't I just spend whatever I want to spend? Is because when you're spending money, and I prefer to say investing as opposed to spending, you're either spending it on one of the three cash flow activities. Operating activities, this may be like, look, CPI right now is 3.5%, costs are going up. That would be keeping up with operating activities. Investing activities, these are bets that hopefully pay off in the future. Financing activities, what are we doing to pay for these things and build up kind of our reserves? So we really need to be thinking about all three of these activities here, not just on my P&L. Okay. Then the other thing is understanding the business life cycle. And I think this is everybody knows there's startup companies. Then you go into this growth phase. That's where you're getting economies of scale. You're expanding your customer base. Then you get into maturity. And look, there's a little hump here in maturity where you go from growing in maturity to decline. So the reality is, which phase do we want to be in? And how do we make sure, look, we can kind of toggle back to this growth phase, because we're in the growth phase. Usually everything's good. This is the summer months. When we get over here into decline into fall, that's when things get to be not so good. So kind of remember, what are we trying to accomplish with how we have to allocate capital? I like this analogy, and again, I use lots of sports analogies because those are ones that people tend to understand. But when you go into that prevent defense mode, that's when all of a sudden you're playing not to lose. And what do you know? That's when a lot of teams actually lose the game when they do all these things to build a lead, then they lose it in the last 2 minutes because they're playing not to lose. Okay. A little bit more about some real life examples with the business life cycle here. Blockbuster Video, how did they become great? We had all these mom and pop video stores. They offered a bigger stores with more selection. Any movie you wanted, you could get there. They were priced accordingly. And they had this big expansion plan. They're growing tremendously. Life's great. Then they hit the maturity phase. And there actually came a point where it's like, look, they were so focused on how do they make money and what their margins were, they didn't want to give up the late fees. When you went online, Netflix was offering kind of a subscription basis. They had the vision to become the 7-Eleven of video stores. They're all focused on retail as opposed to going digital. Wrong thing, and you're trying to maintain the profitability of a business model that's dying. Same thing with Nokia and the cell phones. They dominated the cell phone market. How did they get there? They were actually a conglomerate known for rubber boots and toilet paper. They made the shift into that growth phase. And how do they build these cell phones that they can then scale, shipped out, make the best ones, have the #1 market share? And when we're there, they had an R&D team that proposed innovation in the phone. It was internet ready. This was 2004. It had a big color touchscreen, high resolution camera. The management was like, well, that's going to disrupt our business model, so we don't want to adopt this. What do you know? Apple comes along. Nokia exits the cell phone business in 2013. Now I think they're trying to get back, but it's not easy to get back. So this goes into kind of the science of phase transitions versus the business cycle. If you look here at the business cycle, we see our little wheel here. It goes one direction: startup, growth, expansion, maturity, transition. And you look at our phase transitions here. You got gas, you got vapor, then you got solid, you got your ice, you got your water. We know at 32 degrees, we either freeze or melt. We know when you get 212, you start to boil, and they go both ways. So how do we get the business life cycle to kind of be like, okay, we want to toggle back and forth from maturity to growth, and this is really the mindset of our people. What can we do? What are the things that we can do to throw salt on sidewalks that are going to make that ice melt at lower temperatures, right? Like, we can manage this if we're aware of this. We can manage it a little bit. So that goes into another book that I love here. This is the Loon Shots, where we got some Bush-Dale rules here. We're going to separate the phases. dynamic equilibrium, process-based over outcome-based, raise the magic number. These are the 4 rules. So we keep going here. We're going to separate our organizational phases, distinct organizational phases. And I think this is a big, because we like to measure things. When we're measuring them, we like to measure them all the same. We like to say, what's our average? It's easy to calculate the average. But they're really getting them into 2 separate, who are my innovators? Who are my operators? Knowing management has to treat them differently. And you may have some great control here that had 6 Sigma in total quality management. Well, they got more profitable, but they shut down all their innovation, their new products. And this is a quote here that I have down here that's from their CEO back in the early 2000s. You can't say, well, I'm going to get behind on innovation, so I'm going to measure good ideas on Wednesday. I'm going to try to figure out when to do these. Like, innovation comes through continuous investment. You don't have a bad, you have a batting average, but it's not like there's a formula you run it through. Like, developing things takes time. There's a learning curve that you go through. The same thing is just tried and true, where you just measure it. So knowing, like, hey, who are my artists? Who are my soldiers? I'm going to measure them differently. And then just be aware of, like, look, what's the balance between innovation and profitability? How many people that you have are soldiers versus artists? Like, do you have the right ratio? Are you statement of cash flows? Am I getting the right mix between investing with good investments, knowing my hurdle rates, what I need to get to make returns? So keep going here. Okay. Dynamic equilibrium. And this is another physics term of, like, how do we keep things in balance, keep them going, but realize you're going to have natural conflict between the artists and soldiers. Artists are going to like artists. They're going to prefer. They're going to be innovative. They're going to take longer to do projects. Soldiers are just going to follow directions. It's our job to manage that conflict and then create a continuous exchange, so those things that go into innovation, they're done the right way, right? So this is a little paradigm we have here of the continuous exchange versus the phase separation. If we have here, we have strong separation and strong exchange. That means we have a process between how, like, those things in innovation, and it's based on, testing, making sure we're picking the right ones. That puts us in balance. Chaos is like, look, there really is no separation, so people are working together, but you don't really know who's innovating and who's maintaining. You got chaos because you don't have a process for innovating. If you have no separation and nothing going on, then you get stagnation, the decline phase. And then if you have a strong separation, but then you have a holy leader that's making decisions, and it's sort of a beauty contest who they're picking as opposed to really testing the ideas. Here's you're falling in love with an idea, and you're going to make that innovation work even when it's not a good idea. That's when you land in the trap. So I think from finance, we're in a good position to be the seamless integrator between the groups. So we're going to talk to everybody because we're going to measure the numbers, whether it's between the sales staff and the service staff managing that conflict, or whether it's between field operations. There's all these things where we're the middle person, where you got to see it from their point of view, and you got to get the two to come together and be the seamless integrator. So that's where I see our role. Now this one I love here, it's the system mindset. So let's take scenario A here. We have 3 lotto tickets. Each cost $1. The payoff is 100. Only one winner. Do you make the bet? Scenario B, tickets. Each cost $1. Payoff is 100. Do you make the bet? That option A, you're going to make that bet every time because the expected payoff is $1.33. Where, in scenario B, it's $1 for, So with the outcome-based mind, winners and reward them, and you're going to treat the winner the same and option A is option B, when it's really a much better bet in option A than option B. But if you're just looking at the outcome, you're like, hey, how did that person get lucky? Well, maybe they did just get lucky. Like in scenario A, even if you pick the bad choice, you play that game enough, you're going to win. Scenario B, you're just getting lucky. Well, how do we differentiate and people that really have superior or making really good bets? So I think it's like when we're getting data back, lead through inquiry when assessing results to really understand, well, why did they make the decisions they made? Did we get the right people involved in making the decisions? Are we going back into that, is it a trap if somebody just wants it, so we're doing it because they want it? Or are we doing it because we have a good process where we're making good bets? How do our incentives affect the decision-making process? Like, are we incentivizing our people the right way? We'll get to that on the next slide. Should we also evaluate projects, opportunities in the future? And then, look, like, all these data, then like going in data to your assessment decisions, adding some confidence intervals, putting some scenario like, don't just look at the results and say, okay, here's a winner, here's a loser, but becoming a learning organization where we're really understanding, hey, are we making good decisions and good bets? Okay. So the last stage of the Bush Val is raising the magic number. So here, I struggle with how to implement this, but I find this one fascinating. So if anybody's read Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, it's got this magic number 150 people in the group. They can act very cohesively with all oars rowing the same way. 150, it's like, well, now people start to fight. It's kind of like we can't keep that many relationships. And this kind of systemizes it. It's like, well, maybe 150 isn't the perfect number, but there are things that influence it. And what I love about this too is once I can quantify anything, I instantly get more credibility in why I'm explaining what I'm saying. Like, okay, how are we going to incentivize people? This equity fraction, well, that's how much bonus they get to how much salary. Like, do we have the right ratios there? Is it, this could be even stock, or it could be any kind of thing, but knowing your ratio, what people make, how much they're paid salary versus how much bonus, that ratio makes a difference. Management span, the number of direct reports per manager, and again, this is going to want to be tighter with, your soldiers than your artists. F is organizational fitness. Do we have the right people in the right roles with the right incentives? Like, we may have some people, they may be great in finance, but maybe we got them in a sales role. Like, how do you get the right people in the right roles? Concept, because this is how you really manage your talent. And then G is the salary growth rate as you move up the hierarchy. So you run these things all through the formula, and at normal rates, like let's say there's a management span of 7, your equity fraction, let's say, is probably like 15%. It's like it does kind of work out to be around 150. So knowing your group size is important, and this helps you quantify and just realize, we measure people, and like, look, I look at, sometimes it's like, if we're trying to recruit somebody, well, they want to blame the recruiter. And it's like, well, we've put 6 people in that role and they're all failing. Well, maybe the group's not structured the right way, but this is a real opportunity here to partner with HR to get the right build, because that really affects how we win or lose. So continuing on, some of the takeaway here, capital allocation in terms of the business. While capital allocation should be determined by the business, numbers and ways to encourage better resources allocation. And this is like, be a gardener. Like, don't come in, tell them what to do, this is good, this is bad. Propose the data, comparing and contrasting it in different ways to really learn their decision-making process and be influential. Traditional reports like the income statement need to be supplemented with measuring resource allocation and return on investment. We can't measure everything the same. artists need more freedom, where soldiers need more measurement. We should be wary to focus too much on outcome, measure inputs and good process, let's play the odds well, not solely judge the results. Be aware of the impact on organizational structure, and then keep your, remember, get in that growth phase, get the growth mindset. That's from Carol Dweck. Like if you're planning on how to win, that's different than saying preserve margin and prevent losing. So I can see we got some questions here coming up that I'm going to tackle here. Are there any specific industries or sectors where integration of FP&A innovation is particularly crucial? And if so, why? I think it's always critical to be integrating. The point of FP&A is to influence decision-making, and I look at this as like the instant replay in a sports game. We got to look at it from 7 different angles. And a lot of times my team working for me, they're like, well, why do I got to show it? All these angles show the same thing. Well, it doesn't really matter what we're showing. It matters to takes away from that. So sometimes we got to show, and integrating is so important there because different people are going to look at things different ways. Okay. Then let's see, another question we have coming in. How do you measure the success of FP&A efforts in driving innovation with a company? Okay. This one is more about people treating us as a trusted partner where they actually come to us for advice. If they're listening to us, coming in, you get more incoming calls as opposed to us having to go out, hey, we measured you, here's what we see, and they're rejecting the results. I think and they're partnering with you to kind of see, here's what the numbers mean, how do I find more insight? But that takes building trust because that's not going to happen day one. If you go and start telling people what to do, they're definitely not going to, nobody likes to be told what to do. So I think establishing trust and getting more incoming calls and outgoing calls is definitely crucial. Another question here, what role does FP&A leadership play in fostering a culture of innovation with FP&A departments and across the organization of a whole? Well, I think leadership always plays a role here where you got to be willing to want to look at things differently, and you got to want to innovate, and you got to look for those opportunities. So I think that's more just a desire. So if you have more questions, feel free to keep them coming. I do have some other extra info here. We can go through here. So here's some companies that failed to innovate. Photography. They didn't see the need to go digital. They wanted to stay. And again, that was their business model. We make a lot of money on this. We don't know how to make money going digital. Nokia, we've covered them. Yahoo dominated internet search. Google came in, did things a little bit differently, took that over. Xerox invented the PC, had all this stuff. Blockbuster, we went through them. IBM, BlackBerry. Polaroid is another one. They were actually the first to develop digital photography, but they wanted to stay with their whole old way of getting the instant. We actually invented this back in World War II, the digital photography. Pan Am never adjusted to deregulation. They just built planes. They adjust as opposed to product. Here's another way of how to sell yourself. I really like this one. Buyer's formula, introduce an idea, your information, go through the pros and cons, focus on how things fail as opposed to why they're successful. Give some recommendations, but don't necessarily be too pushy. And then just establish boundaries when you're going through, like use your parameters as you go through. Here we got another question coming in here, question 4. How can FP&A professionals encourage a shift from an outcome-focused mindset to a process-focused mindset when it comes to innovation? Well, I think this is really analyzing the outcomes and then asking really good questions. How did we get here? And what was it's very much reverse engineering. looking at, yeah, well, how did you get there? And how are you going to reverse in? So that's critical. I think someone also being influencing here, like putting this all in the form of a story. Make sure you always position yourself as the guide, and the business leader should be the protagonist. This is where we can work in teams of people as the guide. This is, partnering with HR, with operations, with everybody to kind of, hey, let's all get on the same story. Knowing context by being up to date on data trends. People take action when there's pessimism. I think this is the winter is coming script is really powerful, and that goes back to my first slide. But you definitely want to make sure people are preparing for the winter so we don't get there. Use story templates, eliminate unnecessary noise. Okay. And then finally, statistics bring a lot of credibility to whatever you're trying to do. So statistical methods should enable data to answer. Let's do the scientific math. Let's not be measuring the noise. There's always noise in whatever data you had. Our job is to eliminate it, not to highlight it. It's it, make it useful. Plan ahead, really ahead, avoid researchers' degree of freedom, like stay out of that confirmation before we did the work. Data quality, statistical analysis is more about it's knowing why you're using a formula. So don't just take a formula and use it and brag that you know how to calculate the numbers. You know why you're using the formula you are. Simplicity is better than complexity. Provide assessment of variability, confidence intervals, check your assumptions. So I mean, that's about it for my presentation. If there's other questions, happy to take those.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt, for such an insightful presentation. It looks like we have one final question, and I think it's a great question to maybe close out with. Can you make any predictions for what FP&A teams will be focusing on for the remainder of the year and even into 2025?
Well, as we look forward, we're always trying to predict the future, so we're always forecasting. And then to the extent we can use better tools to do this, to the extent we can incorporate AI into how we forecast. What I like to do then too is also come up with our own forecast and run the stuff through AI, see if it came through the same. Just how can we become a little bit more efficient using technology? But I think it's always just kind of looking forward, trying to anticipate the future, and then making financial projections off of that.
Perfect. Thank you. It looks like that is all. Those are all the questions that we do have. So thank you so much for answering that Q&A. But thank you again for such an incredible keynote. I also want to thank everyone who joined us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be made available on demand following the event. This does officially conclude the Argyle CFO Leadership Forum. Thank you again for joining us and engaging in our content. We look forward to seeing you at our next Argyle Finance event, which will be our Financial Controller Leadership Forum, taking place on May 14th. Thank you again, Matt, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Brett.